What is going on, everybody? Hopefully, you're having a great day. It is Friday where I'm at, so I don't know when you're going to be listening to this, what day that's going to be for you, but I just thank you so much for checking us out today. I'm really excited today to bring on a special guest because we're going to be talking about something that, this is the money talk, right? We talk about hard things on here when it relates to money, but it's conversations that we need to have. And so, but before we get into today's show, and today's show is the conversations we need to have before we say I do. And so, like I said, really important. But before we get into all that, if you are going to be watching this live or you're going to be listening to this, just let us know where you're coming in from. We'd love to give you a shout out. But anyways, like I said, you're in for a treat today. I'm going to bring on a special guest of mine, and we're going to be talking about the conversations that you need to be having when, with your spouse. These could be conversations you could have right now, even if you are married, still good conversations to have. But if you're listening to this, watching this, and you're about to get married, this is going to be a great podcast for you. So I'm really excited about today. Without further ado, I'm going to bring up my friend Chelsea Pagan. How are you doing today? It is Friday. You're on the West Coast.
It is amazing. Fridays are always my favorite day, but I also feel like when you and I have talked the last couple of times, I'm just like always in the best mood because we are kind of riding the same wavelength when it comes to money, and my energy just gets so hyped up. So I'm just in a good mood.
Yeah, it was funny. I was just thinking about it when, first of all, I love the power of social media because that's where we met. We met on LinkedIn, loved all your content, and we were going back and forth. We're like, hey, we gotta get on a call here soon, right? Too much similarity, too much synergy here. We gotta get on this thing. And honestly, when I got on the call with you, and I didn't tell you this, but I'm gonna say it now, I felt like I was talking to like an old friend, right? Like that had.
I love that.
Like, you know what I mean? Like it was a conversation like, hey, like I hadn't seen you in a while. How you doing? Like, and it just flowed really well. And I'm really excited today for your segment of this conversation because we just had a conversation on your podcast talking about our history with money. And now we get to talk about all about you and what you do. So I'm really excited today.
Yeah, I think this is going to be the perfect pairing because it's kind of a comprehensive overview of the conversations about money you need to have with your significant other. So I think it kind of meshes well into where we were talking about relationship with money to where we're going to go today.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So before we get into all that, let the lovely people know who you are, where you're coming in from, and what you do.
So I am Chelsea Pagan. I am a family law attorney and mediator, and I specialize in mediation, so out-of-court divorce work, and also premarital agreements and premarital planning. I am in Northern California, specifically my law firm, Hepner & Pagan, is in downtown Campbell. And over the last couple of years, our firm has been open, it'll be 6 years in June. Every year that goes by, I get more and more questions and people coming to me about prenups and all the typical, misunderstandings that people have around prenups and what it means to actually have a premarital plan. And so the year of 2024 is really me finally investing in sharing as much information as I possibly can with my clients, with my listeners on my podcast, and through, my social media channels to really try to demystify the concept of premarital planning and premarital agreements. I just have so much fun talking about it. I love marriage. I'll have been married for 10 years this June. And I don't pretend to have everything figured out, but I've got a lot of information from my years as a divorce attorney because I litigated, but still do a lot of mediation work. And so I'm trying to put all of that information into one place to help as many people find the right path for them. So I get really hyped up talking about premarital planning because I want marriages to thrive. I don't want the divorce rate to be 50% anymore. I want it to keep going down.
Yeah. I want to talk more about marriages lasting for 50 years rather than 50% divorce rate. Like that's what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
but man, you hit something, and this wasn't a question I was going to ask, but you kind of sparked my interest.
Mhm.
You said, demystifying prenuptials and stuff like that, because I think for a lot of people, when they think of prenuptials, they think both people have a lot of money, or one
Mhm.
person has a lot of money, and we often think about like famous athletes. We think about those scenarios, and
Mhm.
so we're like, premarital, a prenup for me, like, why do I need a prenup, right? Like, what does that mean for me? So I think
Yeah.
this is going to be really interesting.
Yeah. And I'll say it briefly. You're either choosing to opt into the government's prenup or you get to draft your own. So, not making a decision about getting a prenup you choose is still a decision because the government's rules are going to apply if you get a divorce. And lots of people don't, think they're going to get a divorce. But again, the divorce rate's still hovering right around 50%. So, it happens. And so that's the other key indicator is people think that by not having a prenup, they're not making a decision, but they are. They're just choosing a default that the government has decided should apply in whatever state you live in.
I mean, we have all these agreements for when something happens. So certain
Mhm.
things happen, right? You have a will, right? So when
Yeah.
something happens, when you pass away, things go where they're supposed to go, right? And so it's like it just makes it for, in the event, we don't want it to happen, but in
Mm.
the event, it's a little bit easier on, because it's already a stressful situation, right?
Yeah.
Divorce is not something that we wish upon anybody, but if in the event you want it to be as easy as possible. So,
Yeah.
um, so why did we look, or why did you focus on, I guess, family law, right? Like what was the thought process there, if you don't mind me asking?
This is not going to be a sexy answer, I guess. I wanted to be a sports agent, to be honest. When I went to law school, I wanted to be a sports agent. I played college sports. I just pictured, advocating for my clients and having that energy, and being a lawyer was going to give me the ability to do that better. And I just got a job during law school at a family law firm and never left. And what I learned about, so it'll kind of shift into why I stayed versus
Okay.
why I chose it, because I think that's how it actually applies for me. Is why I stayed is I realized that one, every case is different. Yes, particular issues are the same in most divorces, depending on whether you have kids or not, or what kind of assets you have. The issues are the same, but the particular circumstances of the family and the parties are so different. And early on, I realized that my approach to family law was more about preserving the community's estate so that the parties leave the divorce with as much money as possible and did the least amount of damage to their family emotionally. This includes the children.
Hmm.
And a lot of attorneys, they do their job. They advocate for their client. They find, all the creative legal solutions to argue their client's position. And yes, I do all those things. But sometimes there's that reality check conversation about like, is this really going to matter? In a year or two, we're arguing over $4,000 and you're going to spend $15,000 to get it.
Yeah.
And I just realized that I kind of had a knack for being myself in my conversations with my clients. And I think that's what attracts clients to me the most is I'm relatable, I'm honest, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to convince them to file motions or do things that give me billable hours that actually don't benefit their case. From a colleague perspective, I think I'm easy to work with. I'm going to extend deadlines. I'm going to brainstorm how to reduce attorney's fees. And this allows me to take on more cases because I'm not so engulfed in one person's case, trying to bill as much as possible with this one particular case. I can serve a little bit more people. And I just kind of realized that I was good at being in this space. And I don't know if it's a little bit of the hopeless romantic in me. One thing that, might come up in this conversation, but in case it doesn't, I'm going to say it now is my parents have been together since they were 12 years old. They were in 7th grade. I'm still married today. And my husband's parents, until my mother-in-law passed away a couple years ago, would have been married 47 years. So I've only seen in my life, I didn't experience divorce in my life. I had friends that had it, but for me, I've always seen these long-term relationships. And so being in the divorce world, for me, I'm still wanting these people to have that second chance after this, to have that long marriage for themselves. So I want to get them through the process as quickly and cleanly as possible so they can move on with their life. Because I don't think divorce is a failure. I think not doing work before you say I do is a huge missed opportunity to help make your marriage as strong as possible, but it's not a guarantee. Divorce is still going to happen. And so I just kind of got obsessed with the world of divorce and marriage and realized that I was going to be an kind of an everlasting student in kind of this industry, both from being obsessed with books related to it, other experts, podcast, Instagram, all these different accounts that I follow, and all these amazing people who are trying to change the divorce movement into a much more positive relationship and approach that I just, get really excited about. So I kind of just stayed. And now 10 years later, I'm still here.
I love that. I love that. You found purpose in your path, and
Mhm.
sometimes that happens, right?
Yeah.
It's unexpected. Just like I said, I'd never thought in a million years at 18, when I was 18 going to college,
Mhm.
that I'd ever be a financial advisor, right? Like
Yeah.
I was like, that's not in the cards, right?
Yeah.
And here we are, right?
Yep.
And I love the focus, because yes, you still help with the divorce, the
Yeah.
divorce process, but I think having those conversations, premarital conversations, right, is such an important thing to do. Yes, divorce is always prevalent, but like, can we reduce the risk of divorce,
Right.
right? It's like, you're never going to eliminate it, but can we reduce it? And I
Mhm.
think with going through what we're about to go through, you're going to share with us, like, how we can do that, how we can have those conversations. And so, like I was saying, we just got off your podcast,
Mhm.
the Forever But Not Always podcast.
Mhm.
So, a little plug for you. Make sure go listen to that. If you want to hear this first part of this conversation, you gotta go listen to that. So, I, let's start here. So, why is it important for partners, spouses to have just clear communication in general, but communication around money as well?
Yeah, so there's a couple pieces. The reality is that depending on the state you live in, right? I'm in California. California is a community property state, and there's only 9 of them. Everybody else is generally, I think they generally call it like a common law state, but every state has their own rules when it comes to matrimonial law and how it applies once you get married. But in California, the second you get married, all the income that you earn after that date of marriage becomes jointly the property of the two people. Same with assets purchased during the marriage. Generally, there's some nuance to that depending on where the money came from, but that's not important for the purpose of our conversation is so it's extremely important in California because that money is both of yours. Whether one person makes all the money
Yep.
or more of the money, or you both make it. And a lot of people think, oh, well, we kept money in separate accounts. So, we just keep what's ours, right? No, it doesn't matter if your money's in one account and their income's in one account and your income's in another. Under California law, you all put it into one pot and then you divide it. That's kind of how it works. And so if you don't talk about not only your particular money situation, one, how you want to operate during the marriage. So I tend to call premarital agreements marital operating agreements that help resolve issues in the event of divorce, right? So you're coming up with a plan to operate your marriage on a day-to-day basis. How are we going to pay for things? Is our money all going to be community? Are we going to opt into the government's prenup in California and have all of our money be community? Or do we want something else, right? Do we want each of us to have more flexibility? Do we want some other kind of arrangement? How are we going to pay our bills each month? Do we put money into a joint account? What are our savings goals? So there's such a long list of things that you can go through, and we'll get into some of those those details in a little bit. But at the end of the day, if you're not on the same page, there's going to build resentment, right?
Mm,
And so I think financial stress is one of the top 3 reasons people cite as a reason for divorce, and the 2 above that usually are lack of communication or lack of commitment. And I look at those things as the same, right? If you're not committed to your marriage, you're not communicating, and you're definitely not communicating about money. So I always think that really the miscommunications, unrealistic expectations, and mismanagement of the marriage are the reasons that lead to divorce. And then there's all these other subcategories: infidelity, financial stress, parenting dynamics. But what people miss out on the issue of money is it's very avoidable. And there's so many things that you can put in place, whether that's a formal prenup or not. Again, some people are perfectly fine with the government's prenup. That's great, but make that decision consciously. And so again, communication is the broader issue, right? And if you're not communicating well before you say I do, I don't know, right? Like I don't know how you fix that after you say I do
on the fly.
So,
Yeah.
right. Like the things are going to come up and you're going to be like, okay, now we have all these issues that pertain to a legal marriage and we're still not communicating about it. So really getting your communication in check as a partnership when it comes to managing each other's emotions and making sure that you have a mechanism in place to work through conflict when you're not communicating well. Even the best couples who have a good communication practice are still going to lose it on each other every once in a while, right?
Yep,
Like
100%.
my husband and I just had this conversation. Like we feel like we communicate well, and things still happen. We make mistakes, we react, we blow things up, and we're screaming and crying for a moment, and then we get over it, right? But we've at least had these conversations multiple times about how we're going to resolve it. And especially if it's like something about money, we've already kind of gone through the conversations on a regular basis to know, hey, if it's about money, we've already committed to this. And if you broke that commitment, at some point, somebody's got to take accountability for it, right? So from a general sense, when it comes to, communicating and talking about money with your significant other, it's going to impact so many other things in your life. And having a plan in place and building an operating agreement are going to reduce conflict in the future.
Yes, I love that. I love how you brought up like the plethora of issues that cause divorce or cause these types of things. And I'm a firm believer that, like you said, not communicating is a huge issue.
Yeah.
But I really feel like not communicating well about money is kind of the gateway drug to all the other things that happen in your life. Like it's like the crack, right? It's the crack in the foundation, because if you can't get that right, then you're going to start resenting, like you said, you're going to start resenting your partner for the decisions that they're making about their money. That's going to lead you to do other things that you might have not done in the past. And I see it all the time in couples. I see it all the time where, if you, like you said, when the bullets are flying, that's not the time to try to figure it all out. Like,
no,
yeah. Like I know this is a really bad analogy, but I'm going to bring it up anyways, because it's the only one that's in my head. But like, you think people in war, right? They don't, they go through months and months of training so that when they get into war, they know how to act, right? They know what everything's going on, right? Imagine if they didn't have that training, you just threw them out there. It would be chaos, right? But that's kind of like what we're talking about here, is like being able to, start those conversations. Okay, well, we're having these conversations. How do we do it? How do we go about it? How do we put those practices? Because the conversations you're having with them before they get married are going to how they're going to have conversations about everything else in their life. So I don't think people understand that. Like, it's not just about the premarital counseling or the prenup. Like, yes, that's what you do as a technical thing, but the idea of having a conversation about a complex subject like that, if you can get good at that, like you said, you can get good at having other conversations. Not saying that you're never going to have a fight about another thing, because if you're married long enough, you'll have lots of fights, regardless of how good your communication is. It's just going to happen.
Yeah. And, you brought up a good point. And if I had more time, more energy, or thought it was going to be productive, I'd be advocating with the legislature that there had to be some kind of mandatory training before we were issued a marriage license, because, I had to go to school to be able to then take the bar exam to become a lawyer. I didn't just start practicing a lawyer and then I got good at it and then called myself a lawyer. Dating is kind of the same way. You can date, but are you actually doing the work to prepare yourself for the legal marriage? Now, some people who don't get legally married, they call themselves husband and wife. Do that all you want, because the legality of it. Now, you still need to have some conversations about how you're operating, because you still have a partnership that you're building with somebody, but the legality of it does change things. And if you just assume, one, that your marriage is going to be forever, that you assume that, we generally are on the same page, or we don't have that much, so it doesn't really matter. Again, go find somebody who is divorced and ask them if they picture that they would be divorced when they said I do. Most of those answers are going to be, no, I never thought I'd get divorced. And again, when we talk about premarital planning or even prenups, they're not foolproof plans of avoiding divorce. And the data around, the percentages of divorces related to people who have prenups or not is really hard to quantify. I mean, I've researched it and the numbers we get are kind of shoddy. So I'm not even going to give you a number. But when it comes down to it, their divorces are less expensive because they already have a plan. But you have to think of the things that, most commonly are going to be litigated. And that's really where I kind of reverse engineer my premarital planning, is to say, okay, these are the things that we litigate the most. How can we come up with a plan now and put it into a written binding contract that says we're going to resolve these issues in advance while we're on good terms and we're sharing information? It's really empowering. So I could go into 1,000 more details about, the type of provisions or all the conversations about money that I tell people to have, the type of stuff. But, just on the sense of what you were talking about as far as training, like, just dating isn't training you for the marriage, because that legal status of a marriage is the difference maker a lot of the times, because you can just walk away from a relationship most of the time. You just walk away. And they can't take your money.
Yeah.
And you can't take theirs. So it's just something. I think some people, especially when they date for a long time, they're like, we've been together 10 years. Like, a marriage is not going to change us. It's going to be exactly the same. And it's like, well, not really. Right?
Yeah.
Not really.
I love that. I think that's a good segue into kind of talking about, because we've hinted around it. We've talked about it a little bit, but talk about, because again, hopefully no one that's listening to this has to go through a divorce, but I think knowing what your process is of helping that pre-conversation, right? What is that process? Because I don't, most people don't know this. So I would love for you to tell everybody, what does that look like? How do you work with people?
Yeah, from I'll kind of separate it into two categories of conversations. The first is what I deem mandatory as far as disclosure of your finances. So when I'm working with clients and preparing to kind of draft a prenup, there's the standard process of financial disclosures. This includes a list of all your assets and debts, supporting documents for all those assets and debts. It includes tax returns. It includes pay stubs, because pay stubs give you a lot more detail. And then I'll talk about some of the specifics after it. But and really what I call opening the books of each person to say, this is everything. This is all my debt. I encourage exchanging credit reports. And some people are like, that's a little too much. And I'm like, you're getting married. There's nothing that's if you're not willing to do something like this, that's kind of red flag number one that we'll set aside, right? Well, but that's like, if you're not willing to be transparent with your significant other that you're about to legally bind yourself to, then there's a problem there that probably needs to be addressed. But the first part is opening up all the finances, figuring out what it is, so that we can look at it and figure out, how does this particular couple want to operate, right? Do we want to have joint accounts? Do we want to have certain spending that we each spend from our own accounts? Do we want to keep that separate? So it's going through one. It also, this is why it depends on the law of your state. But the same concepts that I'm talking about can apply in any state, because all the states recognize some kind of form of premarital agreement. And with the exceptions of what some states might state that you can't put in there, this is a contract developed by the two of you, and you can contract for pretty much anything you want.
Yeah.
And so after the disclosures, we talk about everyday spending. Everyday spending is the first thing. How are we going to operate our lifestyle, both in fixed expenses, mortgage, rent, utilities, all of the things that make sure we're safe and taken care of and have a roof over our head, transportation, things like that. Then we talk about debt management, right? Does somebody have student loans? Does someone just have a lot of credit card debt because that's how they spend? Does somebody, have a car that has a very big loan on it? And compare that with the other person and figure out, what that looks like and how you're going to manage it. And then also talking about savings and retirement goals and what each of your savings and retirement looks like now, regardless of your age, and what, your savings goals are for the future. Talk about retirement age, talk about, retirement lifestyle, all of those different things. And once we have some of this information down where we can actually kind of sort it out, we can start brainstorming the specific agreements for each couple, right? We can say, okay, we have a situation here where one party makes more money and is able to save a little bit more, and the other party, either plans on not working because maybe they want to start a family right away, and they've agreed in this particular relationship that somebody's going to stay home. That's great. But what happens in the event of divorce, right? So one of the things that comes up, like I was just saying, is why I talk about savings and retirement goals is if you have one party that's not working and the plan is for them to be not working substantially, do we want to have contributions from one spouse into an IRA or retirement or investment plan for the other spouse who's not working? Because depending on how long you're married, your Social Security could be impacted, right? And that could drastically impact somebody's financial stability in the future. So that's why I kind of categorize things in like, okay, we've done the disclosure, and now we have these categories of everyday spending, debt management, savings and retirement, and it helps navigate those different conversations. And it's not a one size fits all. Usually I'm just sitting down and talking to clients about what their ultimate goals are. And sometimes when we learn about the debt of each party, we can kind of learn a little bit. But the last thing that I talk about is each person's relationship with money. And I know we just spent some time talking about that, but that's the last category, because if you have a couple where one person, really saves and doesn't spend a lot of money and, holds it really tight and protects it and, kind of risk averse, right? Then understanding why they are that way is important to the relationship, so that you're not constantly at odds when the person who maybe wants to spend a little bit more is trying to kind of convince the other person that, they need to loosen the purse strings, right? And spend a little bit of money. If you address that early on and come up with a plan like, okay, we can spend X amount of dollars without discussing it with each other. But if we spend anything over this amount, then we need to discuss it and agree. And those conversations and even putting those things in an agreement can be so helpful. The other thing that we put in there, and it's because financial stress, I talked about being one of the most cited reasons for divorces, have an annual board meeting of the marriage and force and make that a requirement and force the person who, maybe there's one person, there usually is. It's very rare that I think both people manage the finances. I don't even know how that would work. Maybe it does, but usually there's one person that tends, there's one person that tends to manage the finances, and that's okay. That's great if you agree. But the other person can't just throw their hands up and act like they don't have to be
100%.
responsible. I think that that's a cop out. That doesn't mean you're not trusting your partner, but you need to be invested in the goals of your marriage as well. So if you do an annual board meeting or even quarterly, you open up the finances, you talk about them, make sure both people have access to things, documents. Also, in the event of divorce, those conversations can be really handy when you think, money might be in a place that you don't know about. Well, if you do these meetings and there's accounts that are disclosed later that were never talked about, throughout the marriage, that's going to be a red flag for the divorce attorneys to probe into some issues. So there's I mean, I could bring on a lot of different points specifically that you can include in a prenup, but I categorize those things that way. I say, okay, we got financial disclosures, all the assets and debts, how we're going to assign those, and debt management, savings and retirement, and then what's the relationship with money so that we can come up with a plan that works for us.
Yes.
Long-winded, Billy, but yeah, that's kind of it.
I love it. I love how you covered everything. While you were talking about this, I don't know if you're a fan of this show. I am a huge fan of this show, but Big Bang Theory, you know
Oh
of
yeah,
it?
yeah.
Where Sheldon has a relationship agreement with I
It's
can't remember her name,
genius.
but
Amy.
like with Amy, he has
It's genius.
he has a relationship agreement. They have how many times they're going to go out to dinner on a
Holding
monthly basis,
hands.
holding hands, everything's spelled out, but they know exactly what is required of them
There's
in
no
the relationship.
resentment there. You
Yes,
agreed to it, right?
you agreed to it, and so
I know. I love that. That's really funny that you brought it up. My husband and I watch that show so much, but
you're gonna have to bring some of that into your social media 100%.
That's a good idea.
Talk about that. But yeah, that's that. I just think that's just having that conversation, right? When both people are in their most logical state, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and I know we talked about it in your podcast, but that's another reason why we do the financial statement of purpose is to remind ourselves what we were thinking when we were thinking logically, right? Like when we were in our best self. So I love that.
Yep.
You were kind of hinting at this. You gave us a little bit of, you knew some of the questions you were going to be asked. So you hinted at some red flags. So let's get into that. Let's get into some common red flags as it deals with communication.
Yeah. Red flags when it comes to communication around money. Definitely the first one I think I already said is lack of transparency around money. And people sometimes think transparency means lack of sharing. And I don't think those two things are related. Transparency is just being willing to share what the information is, right? What are your assets and debts? What are your savings? Like what is all there? If you were to die, what's left over kind of thing. And it also goes to lack of transparency during the marriage. But if it's there before you say I do, you just because you get married doesn't mean it's magically going to change. And having the expectation that things are going to change is an issue in and of itself, especially if you're not expressing that expectation that once you're married, you need to be more transparent because people don't necessarily just change like that. So lack of transparency is number one for sure. Number two is getting defensive when somebody asks for information. I think a red flag in any relationship is somebody who's defensive in general, no matter what the topic, but especially when it comes to money. And when you have one person that's managing the money and the other person's coming to you and saying, hey, what's going on with our investments? And what's going on with this? And how much do we have? And the other person saying, don't worry about it. That is usually a big indicator that divorce is upcoming. And I say that because if they're like that about money, they are like that in other places of their relationship.
Yes.
And I hear it all the time. I asked for stuff. I asked for this. And every time I asked, they blew me off or this, and this. And it's like, yeah, that's a pattern. I would say another red flag when it comes to communication about money is also kind of using the fact that they're responsible for money as a reason why they get to make more of the decisions. There's probably a better way that I need to shorten that in that I'm going to have to brainstorm, but it's kind of that hanging over the head of your spouse. Like I do all this work. I invest our money. I'm talking to the CPAs. I'm compiling all this. And so trust me when I say we can make these decisions. And that may be true. And your spouse may very well trust you because you know it. But that doesn't mean you don't talk to them and agree. I just had this conversation with my husband because, I'm investing in myself and building another business outside of my current law firm. And I told him like, I need to invest in like a business coach and it's going to cost a lot of money. It's an investment. So for a period of time, we're going to be out money without gaining money back. But I need to do this. I know it's the right thing. And obviously I've started a business before that's been very successful. So he knows I have a track record. And I just kind of said, what do you think? And he said, yeah, like if you need to do that, I trust you. And I'm just saying, thank you for trusting me. Like, thank you for trusting me, and made it known that he gets to ask questions, right?
Mhm.
Because, we talk about how we each spend, and we each spend a little bit differently. And sometimes I have to, check myself because I've been spending a little bit more. And because I tend to manage the finances in my marriage, I have to check him in the same way. Like, eek, man, I've seen like you've been golfing a lot. It's getting expensive. Or whatever it is, right? And so I think that's kind of the other piece is just expecting that because you manage it, you get to make bigger decisions and have more control over the money. But that's not how it works. It just means that you need to bring your spouse in and confirm that they're comfortable with the decisions you're making. And if they do trust you, great. But they need to have the opportunity to confirm that they don't have any other questions before you go throw money into things. Especially when we're talking about community property states where any debt you go into, things like that, is the joint debt of the marriage. That's a big deal. In other states where, income and debt is separate, that might be a different type of conversation. I don't know. I've never operated in that world, but I'm assuming that if that's a situation, you're going to have different, a different way of approaching it. But those are kind of my 3 ones that I think come up the most.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that example that you gave, about you and your husband having
Yeah.
conversations, right? And you brought it up earlier too, like, oh, like my wife and I, we have a, a verbal agreement, right? Hey, anything over $100, just check in, right?
Yeah.
It's not that you can't spend that $100. It's just like, hey, common courtesy, just say, hey, I'm going to spend this right
Yeah.
on this thing. Okay, great. Like for instance, she wanted to buy a program similar to what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, talking about money and my anxiety around money, we talked about that in your
Mm-hmm.
podcast,
Mm-hmm.
and like instead of the old me just getting apprehensive and saying, no, we can't do that, we can't make it happen, right? Instead, what I said was, hey, this is giving me a little anxiety. Can we sit down and look at all the numbers and really talk about it
Yeah.
and really have a conversation about it? She was like, yeah. Right. So that not only did that help me, but then, you know, she was going to do it anyways, but it helped reduce my anxiety. We had a conversation around
Yeah.
it. We're both come to an agreement. Hey, this works. Let's move forward with it. Right.
Yeah.
But that's having healthy conversation around money,
Exactly.
and not judging each other, or because I know you'll agree that when you're married, you're a team, right? You do things as a
Yeah.
team, you win as a team, you lose as a team, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
doing this together. That
Mm-hmm.
not only spiritually and emotionally, but you're also doing it legally, right? Together,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I want to bring up this. This is actually going to be, well, we actually have 2 more questions, but this will
Okay.
be one question is going to be a fun question. This one's going to be
Oh.
a conversation that. So let's say we do have somebody that's listening that's maybe getting married, right,
Mm-hmm.
or is thinking about getting married, and they've been dating, right? They've been practicing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that one person wants, they're like, hey, we need to do this. The
Mm-hmm.
other person's either unsure, or maybe that one person doesn't know how to bring up that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some recommendations or some advice you could give to that person to help foster that event to happen?
Yeah. The first thing I'm going to say is, depending on where you are in your relationship, bring it up early. My husband and I talked about a lot of these heavy issues after dating for 2 weeks while we decided to take a road trip across the country. And so there's a lot of heavy conversations happening, and we had only been dating for 2 weeks. But as our relationship developed, we continued having the conversations, and especially around marriage dynamics, all these things. So if you can bring it up early, before you're engaged, before you're in the heaviness of planning a wedding, please do that. If you're past that point now and it hasn't quite come up and you're starting to think about it and you have time, A deadline that I like to keep in mind is 6 months before the wedding at minimum, you should be starting the premarital planning process, including contacting lawyers. Now, you can definitely do it less than that, but that's what I like to tell people is like an ideal situation.
Yeah.
And if you're struggling bringing it up, meaning maybe you don't even know how your partner's going to react. Maybe you have no idea, which again comes to communication, but maybe you don't know. Start by just having one of the underlining conversations. You don't have to bring up the actual prenup legal process yet, but start introducing the money conversation, right? Say, hey, we've got a wedding in 6-7 months, and I think it'd be a great idea if we sat down and really made sure we understand what we have going on. I know you have this account and I have this account, and we should open it all up because we get legally married. Then we'll start talking about estate planning and we should know what everybody has, right? You can start something like that and make it casual and have one of the underlining conversations first. You can also do it in the form of children, right? Children is a big one. Whether you two plan on having children or not, you can start having some of the conversations about parenting and, your philosophies on parenting. Now, this might not go into your premarital plan and your prenup, but it's just an example of opening the door on some of these heavy conversations, right? And then as you're having the conversations, you can kind of naturally bring up and say, hey, I think it would be really great for us to meet with lawyers and just figure out really what the law says. Google is not a lawyer, people. And your situation or a doctor, and your situation is unique. And so, and what your goals are. And I think everybody should have an hour with a lawyer as the minimum allocated kind of money that you set aside as part of your wedding budget.
100%.
And I tell people you should each go talk to your own. Now, there's plenty of people, and I've done this before, that can mediate prenups. And there you have one mediator to help walk you through all these conversations. And then you get kind of an outline, and then you kind of got to, make it legal with lawyers. And you can also do some coaching and premarital counseling that will walk you through a lot of the issues, but it's not going to make it into the legal contract. But then you can kind of say, hey, like, I'm going to go talk to a lawyer. You don't have to say we should go. You say, I'm going to go do this, because you're each your own person. You say, I'm going to go with this. I think you should do it too. So that we can just, ask questions, and then we can come together. I give all my clients that retain me for a premarital agreement this long checklist of all these conversations that they should have that allows them to do it on their own once they're in the process. But if you haven't done some of the work in advance, then it can be very overwhelming. So that's kind of like the step-by-step way you can bring it up lightly if you can't bring it up early, right? If you need to bring it up as it gets closer, just start having some of the underlying conversations. And you also don't have to tell your partner that you're going to meet with a lawyer if you feel like that's going to be a problem. But I'll take it back that if you feel like it's going to be a problem to bring up, that's just another relationship red flag that you should probably invest some time in. Doesn't mean that the relationship is doomed. It just means there's a reason why you don't feel comfortable bringing it up. And that could go back to the person's relationship with money that we talked about. And maybe they're a little bit more closed off. And so bringing it off is a little scary. I get that, but that means you need to have it. The other thing that I tell people is that you really have to decide what your goals are when you're talking about a prenup, right? And premarital planning is, if you have something specific, you don't want it to come from family, and you don't want it to come as it's protecting me. So I have a lot of people that either have living trust, that are lifetime trust. And so they're getting trust income already. Families, wealthier families that have this in place are like, no, you need a prenup to protect our money. Or you have a family business, and you don't want the family to get in your ear. And so if you can, if there's a specific issue, meaning you already know a prenup is required for you. Like, in your mind, you've made the decision, I need a prenup, and you haven't brought it up with your partner, then it needs to be brought up in one of those kind of board meeting like situations. Hey, we haven't really talked about this, but here's, something that's been on my mind, and I want to brainstorm with you how we make this work for us, not for me and my family, but for us. Because even if your family saying, no, you can't get married without a prenup, because families say all sorts of things, you have to decide what's right for your marriage. And maybe that's not a prenup, and your family's going to do what they're going to do. But bring it up in like hey, we need to have this conversation so we can decide what's right for us. There's not a there. I wish there was a script, but when you're not, you have to be in your relationship to know. But those are kind of the three things to highlight. Is one, don't let your family be the ones to bring it up. Two is if you have to bring it up, after you're already in the wedding process, just bring up the underlining conversations or bring up the prenup, depending on if you know your partner. But the number one is bring it up early. It should be early in the conversation about dating, just like children should be early in the conversation when you're dating. People always think like, oh, I don't want to bring those things up and them get all spooked. Well, if they get spooked, maybe that's for the best.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Maybe they're not ready for you, right? Maybe
Yeah.
they're not ready for the marriage. So, but those are my own personal opinions.
No, I love that. I love those. I mean, it is. It should be an easy conversation to bring up, because if you're already having a conversation that you want to spend the rest of your life with somebody, there's going to be a lot of issues that come up in general, not just money, but I mean, like, I love the fact that you said, hey, if you feel a little apprehensive, because it can be like, if you haven't started yet, but like having a conversation, oh, what do you think about kids? Like, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? And that could be like you dipping your toe in the water, be like, okay, hey,
they're open.
I can get in and I can start to have this conversation. So yes, I love it. So last question.
Okay.
And it's going to be a fun one, right? Because we've talked a lot about, all the premarital stuff, all the divorce stuff, but I want people to get to know you a little bit better. So if you can tell us a really fun fact about Chelsea.
Oh, I think I've shared this maybe on my Instagram before, but it's kind of random, but I think fun. I have a large amount of baseball hats, like more than shoes, more than jackets. I have a lot of baseball hats.
I noticed that on your Instagram, you wear a lot of baseball hats.
I love hats, and not just like, I have like flat bill style hats, like from NFL to NHL. Like, I like all the sports teams. I want all the hats, all the styles. I could wear a hat every day. So I think I have like 45 hats, which I think, I know there's lots of guys that collect baseball hats that have a lot too. But it's the thing I have the most of. So, which is like when people come into my closet, they're like, you have a lot of hats. I also have a lot of like, like fedora style, like big fall style hats. Like, I just like hats. I wear beanies, hats. It doesn't matter. But I think I have a lot of hats.
But you can get away with that too in Northern California. The weather is crazy up there. So it's like cold, hot, rainy. It's all kinds of different stuff.
And I'm also terrified of the sun. So if I have a hat on, I feel like my face is protected. It's like I grew up, I went to college in Florida, and I used to do tanning salons and, that whole early 2000s energy of tanning salons. And so now I'm like reverse, and I'm terrified, and I'm like constantly covered in sunscreen and long sleeves and baseball hats to protect my face. But yeah, if I could wear a hat like literally every day, and even professionally, sometimes I wear a baseball hat to work, depending on the client I'm meeting with that day, and doesn't mind. But I'm a little bit of a collector, I would say, of hats, and mostly baseball hats.
That is really awesome. So now I know what to get for Christmas for you. I'll get you a Lids gift card to the hat store. So
oh my God, that would be the best. I think that's an underrated gift. Like, I would find so many things. Like, that would be the best.
I love it. So, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, thank you. It was so fun.
I think we're gonna have to do this again at some point and revisit all this stuff and just have more conversations around this, because we could have probably spent at least hours talking about this. But I'm going to drop in the notes for everybody to for all your social media, how to get a hold of you and stuff like that, and just just check you out and see what see all your information and stuff like that. So, but I really do appreciate you taking some time out of your Friday, out of your creative
time.
Your creative time to come
this
chat
is
with
the creativeness, though. It's getting it out. It's articulating it. It's brainstorming with somebody else, right?
Yep. But like I said, I really appreciate it. And I look forward to many more conversations. So again, I appreciate it.
Same. Thanks, Billy.
No. Well, anyways, guys, hopefully you enjoyed today's show. If you did, let us know, comment, go like her stuff, give her support. More people need to hear this message. So we appreciate it, guys. Have a good one, and we'll talk to you soon.